We're going to move
Sure.
on to the next presenter, and this will be the last one for this part, for the second part. Her name is Jessica Nordlander. She is the COO of ThoughtExchange. Jessica was named Sweden's most innovative leader last year in 2019. Her previous roles were as the head of business development for a few tech companies, including Google. Her conversation and the presentation today is about organizational ambidexterity, which this was a new word that I learned, and I went on and this is quite an interesting way for us to think about how both hands can operate in the same way. So looking forward to hear from you, Jessica. Thanks for coming, and yeah, all yours.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I'm just going to warn a little bit ahead here. I have a hard stop here at the bottom of the hour, so it's going to be a little bit compressed compared to maybe looking at that full 30 minutes. But I'm super excited to be here. As mentioned, I was named Sweden's most innovative leader last year, and a lot of that has to do with thinking around how do you lead with a leadership that unlocks entrepreneurship and entrepreneurships and innovation in others. So it doesn't necessarily being an entrepreneur yourself or coming up with inventions yourself, but how to be a leader that can unlock innovation within others. And when I think about organizational ambidexterity, I think is something that you all should look into, because there's quite a lot of research on this, and it's all about how to balance the quest for efficiency with the quest for innovation. Meaning that, I think that Christian just touched on this as well, that, we're driving our organization on one end to reduce waste and try to be as efficient as possible. And then on the other end, we're trying to drive towards innovation. And often, if you look at research on innovation, you need a little bit of slack in your day or in your resources to be able to make innovation happen. So how do you balance those two, trying to reduce waste and introduce slack at the same time, because they are opposite forces in an organization. And I thought I would talk a little bit about today. I work for ThoughtExchange, which is an enterprise crowdsourcing platform. So it's a tool that gives leaders the opportunity to have to crowdsource insights from groups from tens and thousands of people at the same time. So I'm going to go through this presentation and I'll just give you a quick highlight on how we think around operational excellence across remote teams. And when I think about operational excellence, I think about that balancing between efficiency and innovations. Because to me, I'm in a COO role now, and operational excellence today has to do with how to be both efficient in your organization, but also make room for innovation. So if we go to the next slide, this is what's happened to our platform since COVID-19. So the two lines that you see at the bottom is our usage. MAUI usage through the last 2 years, and the graph at the top is the usage of our crowdsourcing platform since COVID. So you can see that this is this year. We had a small drop the first week of COVID when there was extreme confusion, and then we've had an enormous increase in use. And to me, this is a signal of how crowdsourcing and tapping into the collective intelligence and hearing from the people in your company and your communities and your organization, how that need increases in times like the ones that we've gone through. And that comes both from, of course, from an efficiency and innovation perspective, that you have an enormous need to be able to innovate, and you also have an enormous need to try to figure out how do you just get the normal work done under these circumstances. So I thought I would talk a little bit about, if we go to the next slide, I thought, as you can see here, more than ever, leaders need to solve problems, and also people have this incredible need to be heard. So when I think around both driving efficiencies and driving innovations in organizations right now, I think we need to consider something that has to do with a hierarchy of needs for people to be able to unlock the creativity in them to both drive continuous improvement and innovation in a time of crisis. So if we go to the next question, or the next slide, sorry. This is how I see what's going on in organizations. You're trying to build trust in your organization. And to me, trust and psychological safety is pretty highly connected to individuals' ability to be innovative in the companies that they work for. It's very difficult. This comes back to the thinking of Maslow. You can't fulfill greater needs until you've had your most basic needs taken care of. And often what's happened in organization, if you're up at kind of the possibility, innovation, kind of creative states in your company, if a crisis hit, you get thrown right back to the bottom. So now people are having a very difficult time on their day-to-day in their jobs to think about innovation or improvements to the company or the next steps if they don't even know if they have their health, if they have their work, and what happens tomorrow. So one of the things that we've seen in our platform, if we go to the next slide, is that we've seen leaders being extremely successful using crowdsourcing to move people up in this hierarchy to get back to an innovative state. So for example, if you start at the bottom and you crowdsource among your group and make sure people feel heard on things that has to do with safety and security. So what do you need right now? And then try to move your entire organization up this hierarchy to be able to get to some kind of innovative state. Once you've tackled the most basic needs of your organization, you can start asking people questions like, what can we do to improve? How can we engage you? How do we evolve from here? Or what's possible right now? But in my leadership experience, it's been very difficult to start at the top of this, because you will come across as a bit tactless and out of touch if you start asking your employees about what are the opportunities for the future, if they are very, very worried about their health and their job and their current state of even being able to have access to tools to do their job, because all of a sudden they have to work remotely. So I found it incredibly effective to just bring the entire organization back to basic, make sure you ask the right questions that build a fundamental safety, and then move up again from there. So if we move on. Yeah, so if you try to ask around effectiveness or innovation when the security and the structure and the process is not present, you start destroying trust, and you're seen as a person that's having your head in the sand. So I think there is a little. If you click a little bit further, I'm going to give you some examples of questions that we are seeing actual companies and organizations asking right now. So I'll show you an example that comes from pretty far down in the hierarchy. So one question that is being crowdsourced a lot in our organization now is, what are the most important things we need to do to keep everyone connected and productive while working remotely? So we've seen this question go out in Fortune 500 companies to tens and thousands of people to make sure that crowd prioritizes what are the most important things the company needs to do for them right now. We've seen this being asked, for example, in big school districts, where all of a sudden big schools or districts are trying to get used to the situation of online learning and having all the students at home and things like that. So to just fundamentally start asking questions on the basic level, make sure the crowd feels heard, and then as a next step, if we click further, be able to start moving your organization or your community up the hierarchy. So for example, what are the key lessons that we've learned that we should review? You give people an opportunity to look back, reflect, and make sure that you're moving the organization up that hierarchy of trust. And then if you click to the next, all of a sudden, you're able to actually start asking important questions to crowds once you've moved them through the most difficult layers, to be able to do forward-looking activities and get people to actually start being in a creative space where they can reflect on the future. And I think that if you would ask this question to a crowd, or as a leader, if you would introduce this type of thinking very too early, people would feel like your head was in the sand. And you would get a very probably negative, reaction to how can you expect me to think about the future? I'm just trying to survive now. But if you move people through that hierarchy, you can unlock innovation thinking and continuous improvement thinking and efficiency thinking in your organization, even through a time of crisis. So this was just a slide to just show some examples of what we're seeing right now in our crowdsourcing platform, how leaders are engaging with their community. So I think we could just stop at this slide. And as I said, I have a hard stop in 10 or so minutes, but I just really wanted to show up anyway. So yeah, this was just some thoughts for me. I'm super keen on taking questions or thoughts or whatever you guys are interested in.
Great. Any questions for Jessica, Tony?
Yeah, I've got a few. How do you foster an innovative mindset in an organization?
Yeah, so I love the concept of Slack, and anyone that's interested in Slack can look up organizational ambidexterity, and you're probably familiar with this concept already. I think that, you know, the most famous example is Google's 20% time, right? Yeah. And often a lot of organizations, like you look at structural ambidexterity, which is like how you at an organizational level organize yourself around innovation. So it can be creating an innovation lab and kind of like hiding them away from the efficiencies of the rest of the company. But contextual ambidexterity, which is like the day-to-day of an individual, I think is almost more important. Because even at Google, where we had 20% time, which was supposed to be this thing, you know, this extra time that would allow you to drive innovation, people try to work their normal jobs. Yeah. So people try to use that time for their normal jobs, just because there were so many incentives tied to being good at your day-to-day job and driving efficiencies and you know, getting stuff done that are more about today than about tomorrow. And I think that a lot of organizations, even if you put in place these Slack strategies or put together, you know, innovation units, I still think you need to be super cautious with like all the other structures that you have in place. Like even at Google, like you were usually promoted for doing well in your day-to-day job, not necessarily exactly for what you did in your 20% time. And a lot of people try to get out of the 20% time to then, you know, fit the corporate hierarchy and be better at their day-to-day job so they could climb the ladder. And I think it's super important to be diligent with the Slack strategy that you might have put in place and make sure that, you know, you actually measure that it gets done. Mm-hmm. Not exactly what, because if you have a pretty extreme, you know, attitude towards innovation, you believe that if you can't assess the business opportunity from it, if you can assess the business opportunity from it right now, then it's probably just an incremental improvement of what you're already doing. It needs to have some kind of, you know, unknown to it to actually be considered innovation versus being considered continuous improvement of what you're already doing. But that's a pretty extreme definition of what innovation is. But I think that's an important part. You need to make sure that all your internal structures and you know, incentives and things like that are not tied too sharply or too closely only to the things that will incentivize employees to focus on the right now and the day-to-day and, you know, driving efficiencies here and now.
Yeah, perfect. I'm sure at ThoughtExchange you guys have seen an influx of people coming in. Are you seeing any trends coming out in the last 60 days that you can share?
Yeah, it's super interesting to look at the data. You know,
I can imagine.
You know, as we transition through this crisis, I think we've seen the examples of like what are the topics that the conversations need to be had about, right? Yeah. And often it's about complex topic, because the complicated we as leaders are pretty good at solving. And this is where I really believe in the power of crowdsourcing in this regards, because, you know, complicated issues is like issues that you can bring a team of experts together. You can probably put some checks and balances into place and you can figure out a complicated problem. A complex problem, I'm not sure it always has a solution. Often complex problems just needs to be managed, right? So if I take an example, a complicated problem are what are the IT needs of a remote organization? Mm-hmm. You put a team of experts on that and you try to figure it out. That doesn't mean that it's not a big problem, but it's a complicated problem. A complex problem is, you know, how do we build trust in our organization when we can't see each other?
Perfect.
And to me, that's an excellent example of where you can use like this a collective thinking to get together to try to manage, you know, the trust of a remote organization.
Great. That's fantastic. One last question. I know you got a hard stop. So Paula has asked, what has been the main challenge for your team during the pandemic and how did you solve it?
Ooh. I think that the main challenge for my team, similar to most people, is fear of the unknown, right? Yeah. Like we get very worried when we don't know what's going to happen. Yeah. You know, we look around us and we see people losing their job. We see people struggling. We see companies going under. Every single human will usually think, could that happen to me? And especially the people that feel that they're not necessarily in control over their own situation. And I think that this is often what happens if you place a hierarchical lens on organization. It's usually what happens to frontline workers. They're not sure what will happen to my job. And will I be able to do anything about it should it start going to go sideways, right? And this is what I mean again with like, you need to meet people where they're at in this crisis if you're going to try to move them towards a creative or innovative stage, because otherwise you're only going to have fear. So that's, I think, that the main part of what we're seeing and what we're trying to address in our organization as I think everyone else.
Great. Epi, I know you always have one or two questions.
Well, I think there's more, so I don't want to talk a lot. So let's take one more question from here. I think there's some good questions there.
Let me see.
So Jessica, before when Tony goes to it, I know you have a hard stop. So I want to look at for example, with ThoughtExchange, right? So how does someone who is interested in your services, okay, go about and get the opportunity to work with you guys?
Yeah, so I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. So now you have my name, and I'm as you can maybe tell on the award and my name and my accent, I'm from Sweden. So I have a pretty somewhat unusual name. So I'm pretty easy to find on LinkedIn, which is both a blessing and a curse. So I think that, I'm pretty easily acceptable on LinkedIn, and I try to respond to communication that I get there. And otherwise, it's also super easy to go to our website, ThoughtExchange.com, and just press request a demo or get in touch and all those things. And we're also helping companies and organizations for free with COVID-19 related exchanges. So if there's a need to address, the challenges around COVID-19 in your organization, we're providing the service completely free of charge for all of those purposes as well. So it doesn't cost anything for anyone to use it around that.
Awesome. Great.
Last question is, where do you see the future of crowdsourcing going?
Oh, I think it's going to be a leadership competence.
Yes.
Like the ability to be a crowd leader versus a loud leader is a critical leadership competence of the future. The leader of the past could, stand on a stage and inspire and get buy-in. The leader of the future activates the crowd, taps into the collective intelligence and make group decisions. So I think that crowd leadership is going to be a leadership competence of an important leadership competence of the future. I strong belief in that.
I love that, Jessica.
I love that. Yeah.
Crowd leader versus loud leader. Great.
Yeah.
Great way to end this presentation. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks, guys.
There, stay safe.
Thank you.
And here we go. We're ending the part 2 of the day. Please feel free to connect with the Tipalti booth here on a Q&A section. You can ask any question on Ask Tipalti. We will come back here in 1 hour and a half, so you guys can go there and do stuff you like to do, or you can stay around and connect. We want to encourage you to connect with one another, so please feel free to share your contacts, your LinkedIn, your Facebook, whatever that is. And the topic that we're going to talk about is going to be utilizing crowdsourcing for humanizing AI.